American Gods follows a man named Shadow Moon who, at the beginning of the tale, is a convict in prison. Shadow is released from prison the day after his wife and best friend are killed together in a car accident. When he is informed of the death of his wife and friend by the warden of the prison, Shadow seems numb, unable to process the information. He merely nods. The warden informs him he will be released from prison a few days early to see to his wife's affairs. Through a series of odd circumstances, Shadow finds himself sitting on a plane next to a man who seems to know a lot about him. The man calls himself Mr. Wednesday, but implies that is not entirely his real name. Mr. Wednesday offers Shadow a job working for him. Shadow declines the offer several times, but Wednesday persistently keeps turning up. While driving back home, Shadow stops in the middle of nowhere at Jack's Crocodile Bar and Restaurant. Wednesday reappears, persistent as ever. Shadow finally accepts his offer after losing to him in a coin toss. Wednesday insists upon sealing the deal by bringing Shadow 3 glasses of mead to drink. Mead is wine made of honey, and is referred to as the drink of the gods. Wednesday claims it is traditional. When Shadow asks Wednesday what he will be doing under his employ, Wednesday answers, "You work for me. You protect me. You help me. You transport me from place to place. You investigate, from time to time go places and ask questions for me. You run errands, in an emergency, but only in an emergency. You hurt people who need to be hurt. In the unlikely event of my death, you will hold my vigil, and in return I shall make sure that your needs are adequately taken care of." As Shadow begins his employment with Wednesday, he realizes that Wednesday is a con artist, an old-time grifter. He swindles people out of little bits of money here and there, and people never realize they have been conned. He also has a way of charming people, especially women, to get what he wants. His first night under the employment of Wednesday, Shadow is given a magical coin by a man who claims he is a leprechaun named Mad Sweeney, brought from Ireland by immigrants. Shadow is a lover of coin tricks and is impressed with Mad Sweeney's ability to seemingly remove gold coins from thin air. Mad explains he is removing them from thin air, actually from the sun's hoard, and shows Shadow how to do it. Mad then gives Shadow a gold coin he gets in this way. This is when things start to become strange for Shadow, but he does not react strongly to the strange things happening around him. He just accepts them with a sometimes curious but also numb demeanor. Wednesday queries Shadow about this. Wednesday looked at him with amusement and something else, irritation perhaps, or pride. "Why don't you argue?" asked Wednesday. "Why don't you exclaim that it's all impossible? Why the hell do you just do what I say and take it all so fucking calmly?" "Because you're not paying me to ask questions," said Shadow. And then he said, realizing the truth, as the words came out of his mouth, "Anyway, nothing's really surprised me since Laura. Since she came back from the dead, since I learned she was screwing Robbie. That one hurt. Everything else just sits on the surface." When Shadow goes to his wife's funeral, he throws the magic coin given to him by Mad Sweeney into the coffin as a parting gift to his dead wife. Shortly after the funeral, Shadow and Wednesday are in a small motel, and Laura, Shadow's wife, shows up in his hotel room. It is clear that she is dead, but again, Shadow hardly reacts to this horrifying event. We later discover that the coin from Mad Sweeney was extraordinarily powerful and was responsible for Laura rising from the dead. Laura plays a big part in Shadow's process throughout the story. Shadow quickly becomes aware that Wednesday is an incarnation of the Norse god Odin, hence the name Wednesday. Odin was known as Woden in Old English. Wednesday is Woden's day. Shadow begins to meet many other washed-up old gods who have been all but forgotten. Wednesday seeks them out, one by one, to try to convince them to join a war between the old gods and the new gods. After a big meeting of the old gods at a place called the House on the Rock, Shadow gets kidnapped and questioned by 2 of the henchmen to the new gods known as Mr. Stone and Mr. Wood. His dead wife Laura shows up while he is sleeping, kills all of the men holding Shadow captive, and releases Shadow. He is sure he will be blamed for the murders, but she tells him to just get away quickly before the murders are discovered. While walking through the woods away from his place of capture, Shado finds himself being directed by a huge raven, one of Odin's twin ravens Hugin nor Mugen, undoubtedly, to a town called Cairo, Illinois. He is told to find Mr. Jackal and Mr. Ibis in Cairo and to help them. Mr. Jackal and Mr. Ibis, the ancient Egyptian gods Anubis and Thoth, run a funeral home. Shado stays on to help them for a time. While he is there he also meets Bast, the ancient Egyptian goddess Bastet, who takes the form of a cat. The new gods are media, technology, drugs, money, and so on. The new gods have henchmen named Mr. Town and Mr. Road. They show an interest in Shado. They want to recruit him to their side. No one can say why Shado seems to be so important, but he is. Everyone wants him to work for them. Wednesday sets Shado up with a little apartment in a small town in cold northern Michigan. He informs Shado this will be his home for the next several months so he can hide from everyone. During the time he is there, Wednesday shows up intermittently and drags him off to find more old gods to recruit. Shado gets arrested in Lakeside because he is suspected of the murders of Mr. Stone and Mr. Wood. He is about to be picked up by the new gods' henchmen when two of Wednesday's allies, Anansi and Chinnabog, both old gods, pretend to be police officers and get Shado out of jail. While Shado is in jail, the television suddenly begins to play a scene of Wednesday being detained and then murdered by the new gods. Shado sees them blow off Wednesday's head with a gun. After Anansi and Chinnabog retrieve Shado from the Lakeside police, they agree to meet with the new gods in a neutral place where they cannot harm each other, to pick up Wednesday's body so they can give it the proper rites deserving of a god of old. Shado remembers that when Wednesday first employed him, Wednesday told him if he were to die Shado would have to perform his vigil as part of the employment contract. He decides that is exactly what he is going to do. The vigil consists of Shado being hung from the world tree for 9 days and nights without food or water, just as Odin was in the legend. It will surely kill him, but he does it anyways. Shado goes through many trials on the world tree. He does not die during the vigil, but instead receives spiritual visions and becomes truly alive. He realizes all the things he has been missing in his life and that he has never felt truly alive, which is why his temperament is passive throughout the book. This is illustrated in chapter 12. It must be hard, said Laura, not being alive. Shado replied, you mean it's hard for you to be dead? No, she said. But I was talking about you. I'm alive, said Shado. I am not dead, remember? You're not dead, she said. But I am not sure you're alive, either. Not really. Laura goes on to tell Shado how sometimes even when Shado is there, it seems like she is alone. Shado realizes during his visions on the world tree that Wednesday is his father, implying that Shado might possibly Odin's son Balder, the god of light and purity. He also realizes that Wednesday has orchestrated the entire war between the old gods and the new so that the gods would be slain in the name of Odin, giving Odin energy and life. Wednesday is performing a two-man con, a grifter method which he describes to Shado during one of their road trips, with his other son Loki, who Shado knows from prison. Loki is Mr. World, the supposed leader of the opposition in the war. When Shado is saved from the tree by Easter, whom is portrayed as a beautiful, fair, curvy woman he met earlier in the book, and Horus, the Egyptian god, he goes to the cave where Loki and Wednesday have their center of operations. He discovers Loki dying by the hand of his dead wife, Laura, and the ghost of Wednesday. Shado confronts them and tells them he knows about their two-man con act. Wednesday's ghost tells Shado that he did his job perfectly by being there to divert everyone's attention, like a good coin trick diverts the eye from the hand holding the coin, while Wednesday pulled off his betrayal of both the old and new gods. As Wednesday's son, Shado performing the vigil was meant to be the ultimate sacrifice to Odin, giving him a great deal of power. Loki dies, and the ghost of Wednesday fades away. Shado is left to end the war himself, which he does. Shado shows up on the battlefield and explains to both sides that they were scammed. He explains that Wednesday, Odin, simply wanted them all to die in his name, giving him power. All of the gods simply disappear from the battlefield, and it is over. The epilogue follows Shado as he makes amends with the people he met along his adventure with Wednesday, even leading him to a small town in Iceland where he meets another incarnation of Odin. There are also many subplots and short stories incorporated into this long, meandering tale. But, if you want to know about those, you will have to read the book yourself. American Gods Chapters. Chapter 1, Shado, incarcerated, is about to be released after serving 3 years in prison. 2 days before his scheduled release, he is told that his wife, Laura, has died in a car accident. He travels home to attend her funeral in Eagle Point, Indiana, meeting the mysterious Mr. Wednesday on the way. In an attempt to escape Wednesday and his persistent job offers, Shado rents a car and takes a detour to Jack's Crocodile Bar, to find Wednesday there ahead of him. A woman, with supernatural capabilities that won't be described in detail here, practicing prostitution in LA, feeds on the worship of a client, quite literally. Chapter 2, Shado learns more about Laura's death. Robbie, Shado's friend and employer, is also dead, and agrees to work for Wednesday. He and Wednesday seal the deal with Meade, encounter Mad Sweeney, a self-proclaimed leprechaun, and after some coin tricks he and Shado fight, a test of Shado, set by Wednesday. Shado returns to Eagle Point with a hangover, a shiny gold coin, and Wednesday in tow just in time for Laura's funeral. Shado gives Laura the coin as a parting gift, and runs into Audrey Burton, Robbie's wife, who tells him that Laura and Robbie were having an affair. Then, Shado is abducted by 2 men and brought into the limousine of a young man who tells Shado to deliver a threatening message to Wednesday. Chapter 3, Back at the Motel America. Wednesday keeps busy with a woman while Shado has a dream of lost and forgotten gods. Upon waking, he's joined by Laura, his dead wife, who, after they talk about her death among other things, says that she'll be watching out for him in the days ahead. Shado tells Wednesday that he's ready to leave of Eagle Point, returns to bed and cries himself to sleep. He hadn't cried in a long time. There is a violent story involving Vikings' practices and sacrifices, explaining how the Old Norse gods arrived in the New World. Chapter 4, Shado and Wednesday start off on their journey, heading for Chicago, where they meet with Jzunabog and the 3 Zoria sisters. A dangerous game of checkers leads to Jzunabog agreeing to help Wednesday in his coming endeavors, but Shado having to surrender to a possibly fatal strike on the head from Jzunabog's hammer afterward. Zoria Polunachnaya, the Midnight Sister, gives Shado some advice on how to talk to the dead. She takes the moon from the sky, which becomes a silver dollar for his protection. The life Essie Tregowan, a pretty Cornish woman, is told she always remained on good terms with the Piskies and spirits, believing in them, but often found herself on the wrong side of the law, in dire situations resulting from lust. Chapter 5, Leaving Jzunabog and the Zoria sisters behind, Shado and Wednesday set about robbing a bank, as they need money to entertain their next possible recruits. Shado surprises himself by making snow fall with his thoughts, while Wednesday cheerfully swindles anyone who wishes to use a broken ATM. They travel from Chicago and head toward Wisconsin, meeting up with Jzunabog and the funny Mr. Nancy at the Strangle the House on the Rock. Hitching a ride upon animal sculptures on the world's largest carousel, Shado has a brief moment of pure joy with the men. Then the lights went out, and Shado saw the gods. Chapter 6, Shado finds himself transported into what is later revealed as Wednesday's mind, in which the gods, his companions, appear in various forms and incarnations simultaneously. Wednesday reveals his names to Shado, and is revealed to be Odin. Only a small group of old gods have responded to Wednesday's invitation. Mr. Nancy warms up the crowd with a funny story about he, as a spider, since he is Anansi, stole a tiger's balls and framed it on monkeys. Wednesday issues a call to war against the new American gods of technology and media, insisting that they're out to displace and destroy the old world deities. The old gods, especially Mamaji/Kali, remain opposed, but Mr. Nancy assures Shado that Wednesday will win them over to his cause. one by one. After chauffeuring several deities to dinner, Shado is kidnapped again, interrogated by agents Mr. Wood and Mr. Stone. He is freed by Laura, who has slaughtered his captors and him that she wishes to be alive. Confused, battered, and hunted, Shado flees south, following the recommendation of his late wife. Chapter 7. With some help from one of Wednesday's ravens, Shado finds his way out of the woods and on the road to Cairo, pronounced Cairo, Illinois, picking up a car along the way. Another dream encounter with the Buffalo Man is interrupted by an upbeat girl named Sam, who accompanies him as far as El Paso, Eel. Alone again, Shado finds himself on the receiving end of an odd proposal from one of the new gods in the form of Lucy Ricardo, from I Love Lucy, on the TV, asking him to switch sides. He declines and continues on to Cairo, meeting up with Ibis and Jekyll, funeral directors. Salim, a recent immigrant from Oman, meets a taxi driving Ifrit on the bustling, alien streets of New York City, and after a night spent with him, switches lives with him, sorta. Chapter 8. Shado gets a history lesson from Mr. Ibis, attends an autopsy performed by Jekyll, and accepts an offer to stay and work at the funeral parlor with Jekyll, Ibis, and Bast, the cat. As he goes about his first day of work, he reminisces on the scrawny, bookish kid who had grown into the big, strong Shado we know now. Later, he dreams about having intimate encounters with a feline woman, implied to be Bast, and wakes up to find that his wounds from previous fights and kidnappings were gone and that the dream was reality. Mad Sweeney shows up in Cairo, desperately begging Shado to return the gold coin, which apparently was not Sweeney's to take. Laura now wears it on a chain. Realizing that he is doomed, Mad Sweeney drinks himself into death but stays conscious, as the dead seem to do around Shado, for his wake. Shado relearns the leprechaun's coin trick of taking a coin from nowhere, actually somewhere, and wakes up to find Wednesday waiting to get back on the road. Chapter 9. Spending Christmas on the road, Wednesday entertains Shado with a dissertation on various grifts, while simultaneously seducing their young waitress. Presenting Shado with a wallet and a new identity, Wednesday puts him on the bus to Lakeside. During the trip, Shado has another dream of the Buffalo Man, asks how to help Laura and finds himself crushed and heaved up through the earth until he finally sees the sky. He wakes and arrives in Lakeside as Mike Hainsel, catching a ride to his new home with a kindly old soul named Hinzelman. In the meantime, Sam is questioned by Mr. Town and Mr. Road about her encounter with Shado, and she responds uncooperatively with sass and sarcasm, protecting Shado. Chapter 10. Shado has more dark dreams. The next morning his attempt to walk into Lakeside nearly ends in his freezing to death, but Police Chief Chad Mulligan rescues him from the cold. Mulligan takes him into town for breakfast at Mabel's, supplies, and an introduction to the local color. Shado acquires an ugly, purple car from Missy Gunter, it has sons, and meets his neighbors, Marguerite Olsen and her son Leon. Wednesday arrives and drags Shado off to Las Vegas for some FaceTime with a mysterious god that Shado can never quite remember, though they've met before, as he escorted him to dinner that night the old gods met. Shado asks Wednesday about helping Laura, but she is beyond his reach. Wednesday drops Shado back in Lakeside with a passing mention of eagle stones and thunderbirds and stern order to stay out of trouble. Chapter 11. Shado hangs out with Hinzelman, buys some raffle tickets, guessing when the clunker will fall through the ice of the frozen lake, and some books at the local library. Chad Mulligan fills us in on Marguerite Olsen's unfortunate backstory. Her husband was horrible, and her elder son Sandy went missing. Napping, Shado picks up his dream among the star people, as the Buffalo Man described, climbing a tower of skulls to meet the Thunderbirds. He is interrupted by a call from a furious Wednesday, saying that his dream is drawing attention. The next day, in San Francisco, Wednesday convinces the goddess Easter into joining his cause. Back in Lakeside, Shado is questioned about the disappearance of Allison McGovern, a girl he'd briefly met on his original bus ride to Lakeside, and joins the search party, which proves to be futile. A story is told, which explores the horrors of slavery through the experiences of Wutatu and her twin brother Agasu, who are supernaturally tied. Agasu was a leader in the revolt that formed Haiti, and Wutatu is the mentor of Marie-Lave, the mother of the more well-known Marie-Lave II. Chapter 12, Driving Through the Badlands, the park, in a used Winnebago, Shado and Wednesday find themselves hunted by the opposition, led by Mr. Town. Forced to go behind the scenes in order to escape, Shado finds himself being led through reality's bizarre backstage area, bypassing the spook show and surfacing at a nearby Lakota reservation. Whiskey Jack, as Shado hears it, and John Chapman turn Wednesday down in his attempts to recruit, but have some advice for Shado. Shado continues hang around Lakeside and accompanies Wednesday on visits to various deities in different parts of the country, with varying levels of success. Laura shows up in Lakeside with some harsh truths for Shado, as always, telling him that he never seemed alive. A war has already begun, raging unseen as minor deities fall, one by one. Bilquis, the prostitute in L.A., falls to the technical boy, the young man in the limo. Margie Olson calls up her half-sister Sammy, who decides to come for a visit. Laura applies for a job, working the night shift at a gas station in Jacksonville, FL. Chapter 13, Shado reads about children that have disappeared in Lakeside, dating back to the 1800s. An invitation to a platonic dinner at Marguerite Olson's results in Shado reuniting with Sam, but a trip to the local pub ends in a less pleasant run-in with a hysterical Audrey Burton, who blows his cover. Sam, showing her support for Shado, kisses him. Taken into custody and booked for violating his parole, Shado is contacted by the New Gods as an episode of Cheers turns into a snuff film. He watches Wednesday's assassination, helpless, before being bailed out by Nancy and Zinabog, who have also seen the video. Atsila, the one-armed Siberian shaman, helps to save her people from disaster, but is punished for her faithlessness by not being allowed to enter the new land, promised to be safe and prosperous, a lie. Chapter 14, In the wake of Wednesday's death, Shado, Zinabog and Mr. Nancy are on alarm until the New Gods offer a temporary truce in order to hand over the body. In Kansas, at a motel 2 miles north of the godless center of America, the sides come face to face, reuniting Shado with the technical boy, media, the TV, Mr. Town, and his old cellmate, Loki Lyesmith, revealed to be Loki Smith. Once the exchange is made, hostilities resume, and Shado volunteers to hold Wednesday's vigil, tied naked by 3 sisters to the world tree for the next 9 days and an offering to Odin. Chapter 15, Shado's vigil grows more painful and torturous for every passing minute as he hangs on the world tree. Ray Tartusk the squirrel brings him water, and he dreams of elephant gods and dead children. Hallucinating, he talks with Laura, who later appears in the flesh, or at least what flesh is left. Dying, he feels more truly alive than ever before. He is also visited by Horus, transforming from hawk into naked madman and back again. Eventually, he reaches a state of death, or something. Chapter 16, In the moonless, starlit darkness of the afterlife, Shado meets Zoria Polunachnaya, and surrenders his true name in order to walk a path of hard truths and painful memories, and learning that Wednesday is his father. He meets Bast and gives away his heart. His good and evil deeds are examined, and his heart balanced on the scale of judgment with Jackal at a judge. He allowed to choose his destination. Shado asks for nothingness, and embraces it happily. Chapter 17, 2 armies gather at Lookout Mountain, claim to be the either wonder of the world, the old gods, armed with ancient weapons, and the new gods arriving by limo and Humvee. There were a lot of Humvees. Horus finds Easter there, and asks for her help saving Shado. Meanwhile, Laura drinks from the water of time, which feeds the world tree, and experiences a rejuvenating change, saving her from total decomposition. Mr. Town cuts a stick from the world tree, as instructed by Mr. World. Back at Rock City, The technical boy asks too many questions to Mr. World, and is killed by him. Chapter 18. The old gods impatiently decide to start the battle, while Shado's nothingness is interrupted by Whiskey Jack. Just as Shado finally figures out the game Wednesday's been playing all along, a two-man con, like Wednesday described, after seeing the hidden Indians by the waterfall, a metaphor referencing a prior subject in the book. He's called back to life by Easter and Horus. On the way to Lookout Mountain, town is falling fast for his hitchhiker, Laura, until she kills him like she killed his cohorts, and goes to confront Mr. World. She stabs herself with the stick, so as to stab Loki behind her. Shado arrives on a Thunderbird, finds Wednesday and a dying Loki, impaled by Laura on a spear, and pushes his way backstage just in time to reveal the two-man con and stop the battle. He reveals to everyone how Wednesday and Loki plan to gain immense power by sacrificing all of the gods in Odin's name. As the storm clears, he reunites with Laura, and at her request removes the gold coin, which was keeping her from resting. Note that priorly, though I forgot to put it in the summary, he discovered a possible way to resurrect her with the eagle stones of the Thunderbirds. Chapter 19. Shado drops Mr. Nancy off in Florida. There is lots of fun karaoke in Florida. Shado dreams of the Buffalo Man for the last time, who is revealed to not be a god, but the land itself. Hungover, Shado remembers Ganesh, from his time on the World Tree. He realizes that he has to get back to Lakeside before the ice melts. Having come to an understanding. Chapter 20. Shado rushes back to Lakeside and finds Alison McGovern's body in the trunk of the clunker, just before the car crashes through the thawing ice. During his time period for the raffle, Hinzelman hauls him out of the lake and back to his home. As Shado warms up and recovers by the fire, he confronts Hinzelman, a god who has been killing the children nearly since the start of the town, about the dead children. Chad Mulligan interrupts them, shoots the aggressive Hinzelman, and sets the house on fire. Shado is able to push the events of the day from Mulligan's mind, saving him for suicide, and says goodbye. In Madison, Shado sees someone last time, but remains unseen. Then goes to pay his debt to Xenobog, who taps him on the head lightly. Postscript. Shado wanders about Reykjavik, Iceland on the 4th of July and meets Odin. They talk, and Shado shows him some tricks, gives him Wednesday's glass eye, and walks away.